Hello, my name is Yusuke Morita, Associate Director of the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology at Waseda University. I'm here today on Zoom again with my colleagues from the University of Washington. So I have a question for you. In what ways has the conclusion of the book, How Learning Works, helped you reflect on your teaching?
The conclusion chapter of How Learning Works really resonates with me, particularly the idea of practice and feedback in our teaching. Just as I once had a fixed mindset about writing when I was a college student, I also once had a fixed mindset about teaching. I thought that some people were just inherently good teachers and others were not. The idea of my teaching improving with goal-directed practice and targeted feedback has become particularly important to my development as an instructor. I aim to get some kind of feedback from my students in every class, usually by asking them to take 1 minute at the end of class to write down one thing they learned that seemed important and one question they have. This allows me to understand where I am being effective at helping my students learn and where I can improve. I can even implement improvements in the very next class, then get more feedback and keep improving. In my role as an instructional consultant working with faculty members, I also particularly appreciate the conclusion chapter's mention of the impact of climate on our development as teachers. As the chapter mentions, the climate of our departments does impact our growth as instructors. When teaching is supported by our colleagues and our administrators, we often feel energized to put our effort towards it. And when it is not, we can feel demoralized for spending time on our students' learning instead of on our research or other departmental commitments. As the conclusion chapter mentions, if we're in a climate that does not support us in our teaching, we can turn to colleagues in other departments or to our teaching and learning centers, such as the Waseda Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology and our Center for Teaching and Learning at EDUB. I'm so grateful for my colleagues Yusuke, Milan, Karin, and Colleen, who have helped contribute to the supportive teaching climate on both of our campuses.
While reading the conclusion to How Learning Works, I really connected with the notion of my own development as an instructor in terms of my intellectual approach to teaching. When I first started teaching, having had no training in pedagogy at all, I thought my job was to come up with the best possible explanation of a given concept so that it would arrive fully formed in the brains of my students. I thought there was a right way to explain the material and that my struggles to learn certain concepts when I was a student were the result of imperfect explanations from my instructors. So, if I could find or invent the correct way to explain an idea, my students would instantly understand it and they would be able to avoid the struggle of learning it on their own. But of course, as I eventually came to realize, the struggle of learning it on their own is the whole point. Unless students grapple with the ideas themselves, engage with sincere effort to construct their own meaning, and then explain that meaning in their own words, they will never develop a deep understanding of the material. Once I realized this, I started shifting my focus away from developing the clearest, most elegant explanation possible and towards creating an environment in which my students could build their own explanations. I've implemented a number of strategies to create such an environment, including guided group work in lecture and discussion section and collaborative quizzes and exams. Some of these strategies have worked better than others, but there's always something I can learn even from an approach that didn't quite go as planned. And that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned from reading this book. You're never done learning how to teach. To paraphrase Ambrose et al., improving as a teacher does not mean striving for some static level of teaching perfection, but rather committing to an ongoing, constantly evolving mastery of teaching. I wish I had found How Learning Works early in my career as a teacher. It would have saved me a lot of grief.
I really enjoyed rereading the conclusion of How Learning Works. It made me reflect both on the principles themselves and more specifically on the application of the principle to one's development as an instructor. 3 points stood out for me. First, I was interested in how the authors apply the principle of prior knowledge to new instructors. They use the example that new instructors may begin teaching believing that good teachers have to be funny, that they need to use jokes in their teaching. But this is inaccurate prior knowledge. There's no research to support that one needs to be a funny teacher to be an effective one. In my work at the Center for Teaching and Learning, I often worked with new instructors who believed that they needed to tell jokes, to be funny to teach effectively. And once they realized that they could relax and not worry about jokes, and instead focus on, for example, other ways to engage and motivate students, they were able to develop as instructors and to find out what worked for them. Second, I was struck by the way the authors talked about leading a productive and engaging discussion as the ultimate multitask, a teaching strategy that requires mastery of many sub-skills, including posing good questions, listening carefully, respecting students' contributions, and tracking the discussion. Learning to lead a discussion requires that an instructor develop fluency in each of these sub-skills before she can put it all together into leading a productive discussion. In my own teaching, I learned how key it was to plan a discussion carefully, to determine discussion goals, to structure it for myself and for the students, and to assess the effectiveness of the discussion. And I'm still learning this ultimate multitask. Finally, I appreciated the way the authors talk about the developmental process that instructors go through and that there are stages in this development. Just as novice students might believe that there's always one right answers, new instructors might believe that there's one right way to teach, that there's one strategy, for example, that will get every student to participate every time. Then, as instructors develop in their teaching, they begin to see teaching as highly contextualized and see the many, many teaching decisions that they make every day. In my work at the center, I often talked with instructors to help them figure out a common teaching puzzle, a situation where what worked for them in one teaching setting isn't working in another setting. So we discuss how what's happening in this situation depends on who they are as instructors, what they're teaching, who the students are, and what the broader context is. And then together we could analyze each of these components to help solve the puzzle.
The main takeaway from the book, How Learning Works, has been the strategy to break down complex tasks into component skills. I particularly like how this strategy can be used across several of the 7 principles described in the book. Specifically, in most of my classes, I've used a rubric, but in the past, I used it mainly as a grading tool. The lesson from this book is that I can use the rubric that I already have, not only for grading, but to go one step back and organize class activities around each criterion in the rubric. That way, students get to approach and practice each step or each skill separately first, as is recommended in the chapter on Principle 4, the principle of mastery. And then I can go even one step further than that and collect student information about their prior knowledge about each of these component skills, so I can make those class activities even more beneficial and efficient for students, as was recommended in Principle 1, the principle of prior knowledge. Finally, I can have students reflect on their knowledge, skills, and the process of learning so that they can improve their metacognition and become more self-directed learners, as is recommended in the chapter on Principle 7 about self-directed learning. So I really want to place the rubric at the center of my course planning as a starting point for bringing together Principles 4 of mastery, 5, practice and feedback, 1, prior knowledge, and 7, self-directed learning. And the rubric might even help make a positive effect on Principle 6, the class climate. Studies done here at the University of Washington show that using more structure in class, more active learning, helps all students learn. It improves students' achievement across the board. But using structure also helps narrow down the achievement gap between students from different backgrounds, underrepresented groups and dominant groups, and first-generation students and non-first-generation students. So using more structure in general, and the rubric in particular, can help me accomplish the goal of teaching in a way that is both effective and equitable and fair for all of my students.
This book makes me realize many things about the changes I made in my teaching over the years. The principles of prior knowledge in chapter 1 and of knowledge organization in chapter 2 made me think about the student learning. In addition, the principles of motivation in chapter 3 and the course climate in chapter 6 had an impact not only on teaching skills, but also on the importance of communication with students in class and atmosphere creation. In chapters 4, 5, 7, I was able to reconsider students' growth in my Zemi. Overall, I was able to reflect on my own efforts, and I think that it also helped me improve my own metacognition. After reading this book, so I would like to invite my colleagues to visit my class, and I would welcome peer assessment. In Japan, University faculty members become faculty members without learning the methods for teaching. Through faculty development, we need to create opportunities to learn the evidence-based research about teaching.